here we are. This is Sex, Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat. Bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more.
Yeah, amazing. I want to discuss that too. And when we're talking about, you're saying that it's showing up in the breast milk. And I know I know from the research with ketamine that I've studied under, it shows up very little. And so as you can share about the plant medicines as that's showing up, and is this toxic per se to the development of the child in breastfeeding or in gestation? Can you perhaps expand on that?
Absolutely. I think I've done like 100 podcasts detailing this, and I am I'm happy to share it with your audience, and I'm happy to also share that um, it's this one experiment that happened is not the definite and end of our knowing. This is what we are later going to showcase to the world, like what is the impact? What is the impact on gestating babies, and what is the impact on breastfeeding kids? And what are the mushroom babies and the LSD babies and the ayahuasca babies looking like in our world? Because they're here and they're like 5 and 6 years old. So and I look forward to asking them about who they are and what they're like, and how they think their brain functions. But I will say that the pass through, at least gestationally, of psilocybin and other entheogens is really like carefully filtered by the placental tissue, which is obvious. And I think for anyone who studies the womb and knows anything about midwifery and the genius of the body, it's really the placenta's role and part of the incredible intelligence that it has to let things in and pull things out and move things through. And, I think that's really meaningful and important. And I would also just like to maybe like drop the seed of, where did we get kind of these cultural frameworks around, or these ideas and propagandas around, like, mothers harming children with drugs in their system. And let's look at the drug war, and like let's look at what the narrative base proposed by the drug war really makes us feel like when we're thinking about mothers eating mushrooms. And are we placing sensationalism on top of that? And I think that's important to distinguish, because a lot of mothers that are making this choice do so with the fear that they're putting themselves and their families' lives at great risk, not just because of potential for, augmenting the pregnancy in any way that might be perceived as harmful, but also at like, how am I going to be looked at? What stigmas are now upon me for being a selfish mom or a bad mom, or how could you even do that? And also, by the United States government, like perceiving or making this grounds for wanting to remove children from mothers' care. So just a shout out to all the moms that like have been listening to their intuition and feel really called to take this step, and also are doing so with some friction, right? Because not everyone is like, with open arms about people's decision making, especially while pregnant. So the psilocin experiment that was done on pregnant rats tells us a lot about the concentrations of psilocin in the mother's body versus the concentration in the fetus. So yes, it does pass through. We know that the babies are being bathed in whatever the mom is having, and that includes psilocin and psilocybin. So we just kind of need to like get over the idea that we're never going to perfectly time, like, you know um, especially with breastfeeding, like this pump and dump method of, oh, it's in this for 24 hours, and so you should just like dump your milk out. And there are some great charts and resources to show what the half-life is and where it lives in the breast milk and things. But I will just say this with like the utmost clarity that I possibly can: if you're afraid that it's ever going to come in contact with your child, like maybe it's better to, maybe there's a different choice, or maybe there's an inquiry that we can that we can look at, because it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to perfectly like time that breastfeeding, and you might just miss out on you might just fill yourself with so much paranoia that is it even worth it
Yeah.
at the end of the day? Because you're going to be looking at your watch and trying to do it perfect and just right. And you might still get psilocybin into your child. And so I think the question is how much do we trust psilocybin as a substance? And I love to get into that because you mentioned earlier about toxicity. Is psilocybin a toxic agent? And at what level does it become toxic? And like, what does toxicity look like? And um, have we observed psilocybin toxicity in anyone at this point? So some of the only ways that we really understand toxicity, at least like in the science, is the LD50 test. And, you know, they've done these studies to see how much of a certain substance will need to be um, present in order to like kill half a population of the subjects, which is a really terrible experiment. But it tells us, you know, what is what it gives us some kind of measurement of toxicity. And so that this has been done for all of the classic entheogens, from LSD to psilocybin and THC and even mescaline, which I think is so valuable and important, because people deserve to know how these things stack up against very regularly consumed items like sugar and caffeine and nicotine and aspirin and ibuprofen and these, you know, acetaminophen and all these other things, and morphine, that are so regularly distributed to pregnant, at birth, and breastfeeding mothers. So I think morphine is a really interesting one because it's in the epidural. So we have examples, and I've done presentations on the presence of entheogens and their place within the birth world and obstetric practice, because we use entheogenic plants and fungus in obstetrics. There is a lineage and a history of not only traditional midwives using ergot fungus, for example, to progress stalled labor, but also ergotamine as a way to stop uterine hemorrhage, and ergotamine for migraines, which is a derivative of ergot. So it's cool to see how things like belladonna, which is a poisonous plant, being, you know, pulled, what's being pulled from belladonna is scopolamine, which is then what's used in the twilight sleep that a lot of women were induced into, you know, for about 13 years in early obstetrics. So it's like, it's really, really cool, because when you just kind of look at the legacy of midwifery, there's all kinds of entheogens and poisonous plants being used for all of their medicinal properties. And the question is, who has the right and the privilege to use those? And that's mostly the question.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex, Love, Psychedelics.